When Thomas discovers a mysterious text on his wife Claire's phone, his seemingly perfect life unravels. What begins as a suspicion of infidelity turns into a journey through layers of deception, culminating in a shocking revelation that changes everything he thought he knew about his wife, and himself. As Thomas navigates betrayal, unexpected family secrets, and his determination to protect his children, he faces an emotional and moral crossroads. Will he rebuild the life he lost or forge a new path in the face of heartbreak and unexpected truths? This is a gripping tale of love, trust, and resilience, where every twist exposes deeper cracks in the facade of a once-perfect marriage. It was a typical Thursday evening, the kind where the monotony of routine felt comforting. Dinner was on the stove, the kids were finishing homework, and Claire had texted to let me know she'd be late. Again. Meeting ran over, she wrote. Don't wait up. It wasn't the first time her job in marketing kept her out late, and I'd long stopped questioning it. We had trust, or so I thought. The evening rolled on. I helped the kids pack their school bags for the next day, listened to their stories about math tests and playground squabbles, and tucked them into bed. I went back downstairs, ready to crash on the couch with a beer and Netflix. That's when I saw it, Claire's phone, sitting unattended on the counter. Ordinarily, I wouldn't have given it a second thought. Claire and I had an unspoken understanding about privacy, we didn't snoop through each other's phones. But as I reached to move it aside, the screen lit up with a message, "Can't wait to see you again, babe. Last night was incredible." My breath caught. The sender's name? Nick. Nick. The colleague Claire had mentioned once or twice. The guy who seemed like an afterthought in passing conversations. My mind raced. Was this a misunderstanding? A prank? I told myself not to overreact, to give Claire the benefit of the doubt, but the message replayed in my head like a broken record. I placed the phone back on the counter, my hands shaking. This couldn't be what it looked like. Claire was late because of work, she had said so herself. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted, and no amount of rationalizing could uproot it. That night, I barely slept. When Claire finally came home, hours later, I pretended to be asleep. She slipped into bed, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. My heart sank deeper. I wanted to confront her then and there, but something in her calm, oblivious demeanor made me hesitate. Maybe I needed more than a single suspicious text before I accused my wife of betrayal. The next morning, Claire was her usual self, cheerful, hurried, and entirely unbothered. She kissed me on the cheek as she grabbed her coffee. "Long night," she said casually. "Client issues. You know how it is." I nodded, forcing a smile, though inside, I was unraveling. The days that followed became a blur of suspicion and second-guessing. Every time Claire came home late or spent extra time on her phone, I felt the walls of trust closing in. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was all in my head. But the nagging doubt wouldn't let go. It wasn't until the bank statement arrived a week later that the picture began to sharpen. I had taken a peek while sorting through the mail, only to notice a $3,000 charge to a local jewelry store. My pulse quickened. Claire hadn't mentioned buying anything for me, or anyone else, for that matter. What was she spending thousands of dollars on without a word? I called the store, my curiosity outweighing my hesitation. The clerk on the other end was helpful, almost too helpful. "Oh yes," she said cheerfully. "I remember her. She said her wedding and engagement rings were stolen and wanted replacements. Is there an issue with the new ones?" I froze. Stolen rings? Claire hadn't mentioned anything about that. Her wedding and engagement rings were still on her hand the last time I checked. The clerk's words echoed in my head, stolen rings. Something wasn't adding up. That night, I confronted Claire. "Hey," I said casually over dinner. "Did something happen to your rings?" Her fork paused midway to her mouth. "What do you mean?" I noticed a charge to a jewelry store, I said, trying to keep my tone light. Figured you might have replaced them or something. Her face paled. For the first time, Claire looked genuinely caught off guard. Oh, that, she said, laughing nervously. I had to get them resized. That's all. It was a feeble lie, and we both knew it. But I nodded, not wanting to push her too far, yet. If Claire was hiding something, I needed more than a half-baked excuse before confronting her fully. Over the next few days, I watched her like a hawk. Every phone call, every late night at work, every oddly cheerful mood became a potential clue. I even started keeping track of her work trips and scrutinizing her explanations. The more I observed, the more the cracks in her story began to show. One evening, as she sat texting furiously on the couch, I decided to take the plunge. While she was in the shower, I unlocked her phone. Her passcode hadn't changed, our anniversary date, ironically. I scrolled through her messages, feeling like a criminal but unable to stop myself. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Conversations with Nick, peppered with intimate exchanges and plans for rendezvous. Mentions of hotel rooms and shared laughter about how easy it was to keep me in the dark. My chest tightened as I read the words. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a one-off mistake. This was an affair. When Claire emerged from the shower, she found me sitting at the kitchen table, her phone in my hand. Her face fell. Thomas, she started, her voice trembling. I can explain. But I wasn't interested in explanations. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, her eyes welling with tears. A year, she admitted. Maybe a little more. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. A year. An entire year of lies, of stolen moments, of betrayal. I stood, the phone still clutched in my hand. Pack your things, I said coldly. You and Nick can have each other. Claire sobbed, pleading for forgiveness, but her words fell on deaf ears. I was done. Whatever we had was broken beyond repair, and no amount of apologies could fix it. As she packed her bags, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I had spent years building a life with someone who wasn't who I thought she was. It was time to start over, even if it meant doing it alone. The next morning, Claire was gone, and for the first time in years, the house felt quiet. Too quiet. But as I stood in the doorway, watching the sun rise, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, hope. This wasn't the end, it was a new beginning. The days after Claire left were a strange blend of relief and sorrow. The house, once filled with her voice and laughter, now echoed with silence. The kids noticed her absence immediately. Emma, my oldest, asked the question I'd been dreading over breakfast. Where's Mom? I paused mid-sip of coffee, searching for the right words. She had to go away for a while, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's complicated. Is it because you fought last night? She pressed, her hazel eyes narrowing in concern. I forced a smile. We'll talk about it later, okay? How about pancakes this weekend? We can make them just like we used to. Emma nodded hesitantly, sensing there was more to the story but knowing better than to push. Daniel, my youngest, seemed less curious. He was too preoccupied with his action figures to notice the cracks forming in our family. Once they were off to school, I sat in the quiet kitchen, staring at the mess left on the table. Plates with half-eaten toast, juice glasses tipped slightly, a spoon dripping jam onto the surface. It all felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. I had spent years thinking I knew Claire, trusting her implicitly, and yet, I had no idea who she truly was. The bitterness boiled in me like an unwelcome guest, whispering that I should have seen the signs. The missed dinners, the unexplained absences, her sudden bursts of affection that felt more like guilt than love. And Nick, the coworker I'd never met but now despised more than anyone in the world. I clenched my fists at the thought of him. How could they have done this to me? To us? But there was no time to dwell. I had work to do, both professionally and personally. My job in IT required focus, and thankfully, it was a distraction I welcomed. After all, nothing helped drown out heartache like troubleshooting someone else's problems. By mid-afternoon, I had cleared my inbox and resolved a dozen client issues. Still, when I closed my laptop, the void Claire had left came rushing back. That evening, as the kids played in the living room, I started sorting through the wreckage of my marriage. I opened the drawer in our bedroom where Claire kept her personal items, old cards, photographs, little trinkets she cherished. At first, it felt invasive, like I was digging into a stranger's life. But soon, it became clear that I wasn't looking for keepsakes. I was looking for answers. Among the sentimental clutter, I found an envelope tucked at the bottom. It was from a spa, dated months ago, for a weekend getaway I had no memory of her taking. My stomach churned as I flipped through the receipt, noting the charges for massages, champagne, and a suite booked for two. Claire had never mentioned this trip. My hands trembled as I set it aside, wondering how many more secrets were hidden in our home. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, I decided to take a bolder step. It was time to see what Claire had left on her laptop. She'd always been meticulous about logging out of her accounts, but I knew her habits well enough to guess her password. Sure enough, her email opened before me. At first, there was nothing: mundane work correspondence, grocery store coupons, reminders from the kids' school. But as I scrolled further, I found a folder marked personal. My pulse quickened as I clicked on it. Inside were dozens of emails between Claire and Nick. Some were innocuous, talking about office projects or client meetings. But others were damning. Plans for dinners, compliments that veered into flirtation, discussions of trips I'd never heard about. One subject line stood out: last weekend was perfect. I hesitated before opening it. Did I really want to know? Did I need to see the extent of her betrayal? The answer came quickly: yes. I deserved to know everything. The email was a detailed recounting of their weekend at a cabin by the lake, a weekend I had thought Claire was spending on a business trip. She described the way the sunrise reflected off the water, the laughter they shared over wine, the moments of intimacy that now felt like a knife twisting in my chest. By the time I finished reading, I could barely breathe. Rage overtook me. I wanted to confront her, to scream at her for destroying everything we'd built. But she wasn't here, and screaming at an empty room felt pointless. Instead, I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, trying to make sense of what my life had become. The next morning, I called a lawyer. If Claire thought she could have her affair and walk away unscathed, she was wrong. I wanted full custody of the kids, and I wanted her out of my life for good. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia, assured me that the evidence I had, emails, receipts, and the timeline of her lies, would work in my favor. Family court doesn't look kindly on infidelity, she said, her tone firm. Especially when it involves deception on this scale. It wasn't just about winning, though. It was about protecting my kids. I couldn't let them see Claire's behavior as acceptable. They deserved better than the mess she had made. By the end of the week, the paperwork was in motion. Claire's absence became permanent, and I focused on rebuilding the life she had shattered. It wasn't easy. Emma cried herself to sleep some nights, and Daniel kept asking when Mom was coming back. I told them what I could, that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes too big to fix. Through it all, I found strength in small victories: getting the kids to school on time, cooking dinner without burning it, holding my temper when the memories of Claire's betrayal threatened to overwhelm me. I wasn't perfect, but I was determined. Because while Claire had left me broken, she hadn't left me defeated. This was my chance to start over, to build something stronger, something honest. And as I looked at my kids, I knew I had more than enough reason to fight for the future we deserved. The weeks following Claire's departure felt like a crash course in survival. Every day presented a new challenge, from managing the kids' emotions to handling the endless stream of questions from family and friends. Everyone wanted to know where Claire was, what had happened, and if we were okay. I wasn't ready to share the truth with most of them, so I stuck to a generic response: "We're figuring things out." But behind the scenes, things were far from figured out. Claire had contacted me multiple times, pleading for a chance to talk. Her texts ranged from apologetic to angry, each one demanding attention. "You're not being fair," one read. "At least let me explain." Another simply said, "I miss the kids. Let me see them." Each message was like a fresh wound, reopening the pain I was trying to bury. But I ignored her. I needed space to think, to rebuild, to find some semblance of normalcy for myself and the kids. The kids, of course, were my top priority. Emma, with her sharp intuition, knew there was more to the story than I was letting on. "Dad," she said one evening while helping me with dinner, "Mom didn't just leave, did she?" I hesitated, stirring the pasta sauce to buy myself time. "It's complicated, sweetheart," I finally said. "Sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they love." "Did she hurt you?" Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper. I knelt to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "She made some mistakes," I said gently. "But no matter what, she loves you and your brother very much. That hasn't changed." Emma nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm mad at her," she admitted. "But I still miss her." "I know," I said, pulling her into a hug. "It's okay to feel both." Daniel, on the other hand, was blissfully oblivious. At 6 years old, he was more concerned about whether I remembered to pack his favorite snacks for school than the intricacies of our fractured family. His innocence was both a blessing and a burden. I wanted to protect it for as long as I could, but I knew the day would come when he'd need answers too. Meanwhile, the legal battle with Claire began to heat up. My lawyer, Patricia, had been relentless in gathering evidence to support my case for full custody. The emails, the jewelry receipt, the timeline of her deceit, it all painted a damning picture. Claire's lawyer, on the other hand, argued that her infidelity had no bearing on her ability to parent. It was a weak argument, but it still stung to hear someone defend her actions. The first court hearing was a whirlwind of tension and suppressed rage. Claire was there, looking composed but pale. She glanced at me once as we sat on opposite sides of the room, her eyes pleading for something, understanding, forgiveness, I wasn't sure. I didn't return the look. The judge listened to both sides, asked a few pointed questions, and scheduled a follow-up hearing for later that month. It wasn't the decisive victory I had hoped for, but Patricia assured me we were on solid ground. "Judges prioritize stability," she said. "And right now, you're the stable parent." After the hearing, Claire approached me in the hallway. "Thomas, please," she said, her voice cracking. "Can we talk? Not as enemies, but as two people who love their kids." I wanted to walk away, to tell her she had lost the right to any civil conversation. But something in her tone stopped me. I nodded curtly and gestured toward a quiet corner of the courthouse. "I'm sorry," she began, her eyes brimming with tears. "I know I've made a mess of everything, but I didn't mean for it to get this far. Nick, he wasn't supposed to be anything more than a distraction." "A distraction?" I repeated, my voice cold. "You threw away our marriage, our family, for a distraction." She flinched but didn't look away. "I was lonely," she said quietly. "You were always working, always tired. I felt invisible." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had worked hard to provide for our family, to give Claire and the kids everything they needed. And yet, somewhere along the way, I had failed to see what she needed most. "That doesn't excuse what you did," I said. "If you were unhappy, you could have talked to me. We could have worked on it together. But instead, you lied to me. To our kids. Claire nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know, she whispered. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. For a moment, I felt a flicker of something, pity, maybe, or the ghost of the love we once shared. But it was quickly extinguished by the weight of her betrayal. I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice firm. The kids deserve better. I deserve better. She wiped her eyes, her hands trembling. I understand, she said. But please, don't shut me out completely. I need to be part of their lives. I didn't respond right away. The idea of sharing custody with someone who had caused so much damage felt unbearable. But I knew the kids needed their mother, even if I didn't. I'll think about it, I said finally, before turning and walking away. The days that followed were a blur of work, parenting, and preparing for the next court date. I tried to focus on the positives, the small victories, like making it through a family dinner without anyone crying, or helping Emma ace her science project. But the shadow of Claire's actions lingered, a constant reminder of how quickly life could unravel. One evening, as I tucked Daniel into bed, he looked up at me with sleepy eyes. Do you still love Mom? He asked, his voice innocent and full of curiosity. I hesitated, my chest tightening. I'll always care about your mom, I said carefully. She's your mom, and she's a part of you. But sometimes, love changes. And that's okay. Daniel nodded, already drifting off to sleep. As I watched him, I realized that while my love for Claire might have changed, my love for my kids had only grown stronger. They were my anchor, my reason to keep going. No matter what the future held, I knew one thing for certain, would do everything in my power to protect them, to give them the stability and love they deserved. Claire might have broken our family, but she hadn't broken me. And as long as I had Emma and Daniel, I had everything I needed. Life began to stabilize, or so it seemed. The weeks turned into months, and the routine of single parenthood settled in. I had the kids, my work, and a newfound sense of determination to rebuild. Claire's presence was now a distant shadow, a memory I was learning to live with. The court proceedings dragged on, but I remained steadfast in my resolve. The kids were adapting, and while they missed their mother, they were thriving in our new dynamic. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. It was a plain white envelope, addressed to me in handwriting I didn't recognize. Curious, I opened it at the kitchen table while Daniel played with his Legos in the living room and Emma worked on homework upstairs. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a note written in hurried scrawl. Thomas. You deserve the truth, even if it hurts. Claire isn't who you think she is. Neither is Nick. A friend. There was no return address, no signature, nothing to indicate who had sent it. My heart pounded as I reread the note, the words blurring in my mind. Was this some cruel prank? A vindictive jab from someone who wanted to stir up trouble? Or was there more to the story than I realized? The next day, I couldn't shake the message from my thoughts. I went back to Claire's emails, the ones I had saved as evidence for court. I pored over them, looking for anything I might have missed. That's when I noticed something odd. One of the emails to Nick referenced a date and time for a meeting at a hotel, but the location didn't match where Claire claimed she had been that weekend. My stomach tightened as I cross-referenced the email with our credit card statements. Sure enough, a charge for a different hotel appeared on the same day. I called the hotel, pretending to confirm a past reservation, and after some coaxing, the clerk provided the name of the guest Claire had booked the room with. It wasn't Nick. It was a woman named Hannah. The revelation hit me like a freight train. Who was Hannah? Why was Claire meeting her at a hotel? And why had she gone to such lengths to hide it? My mind raced with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. That evening, I decided to confront Claire. I called her, keeping my voice calm despite the storm brewing inside me. We need to talk, I said. In person. She hesitated but agreed to meet at a coffee shop the next day. When she arrived, she looked nervous, her eyes darting around as if expecting an ambush. "What's this about?" she asked, sitting across from me. I slid the hotel receipt across the table. "Who's Hannah?" I asked bluntly. Claire's face went pale. She opened her mouth to speak but closed it again, as if struggling to find the right words. Finally, she exhaled shakily. "You weren't supposed to find out," she said quietly. "Find out what?" I pressed, my patience wearing thin. Claire hesitated again, then leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hannah is my sister." The world seemed to tilt. "Your sister? What are you talking about? You don't have a sister." "Yes, I do," she said, her voice trembling. "She's my half-sister. My mother had an affair before I was born, and Hannah was the result. My parents kept it a secret, even from me, until a few years ago. I only met her recently." I stared at her, struggling to process the revelation. "Why would you lie about meeting her? Why would you keep this from me?" "Because I didn't know how to explain it," Claire said, tears welling in her eyes. "Hannah's life is complicated. She's been in trouble with the law, and I didn't want her problems to spill over into our family. But she's my sister, Thomas. I felt like I owed her a chance." I leaned back in my chair, my mind reeling. This was not the explanation I had expected. "What about Nick?" I asked. "Was any of that real?" Claire nodded, her expression pained. "Yes, Nick was real. But he was a mistake. Meeting Hannah wasn't. She's the only family I have left now." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or furious. The betrayal I had felt for months now seemed tangled in a web of secrets far more complex than I had imagined. "So, where does this leave us?" I finally asked. Claire wiped her eyes and met my gaze. "I don't know," she admitted. "I know I've hurt you, and I know I've lost your trust. But I want to make things right, for the kids, if nothing else." I didn't respond right away. The anger and betrayal I had felt were still raw, but beneath it all, there was a flicker of something else, understanding. Claire had made mistakes, terrible ones, but she wasn't the only one carrying the weight of a fractured family. Maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward, even if it wasn't the one I had envisioned. "I'll think about it," I said, standing to leave. "But don't expect miracles, Claire. This is going to take time." As I walked away, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a glimmer of hope. Life had thrown more curveballs than I thought I could handle, but I wasn't giving up. Not on myself, not on my kids, and maybe, just maybe, not on Claire. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, I felt ready to face it. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for sure: I would never let secrets and lies define my life again.